Good day once again. Back in the classroom, back with investment analysis and portfolio management, and once again, we haven't gotten over with technical analysis as yet. So one more session of technical analysis today, and then we shall be moving onwards to other pastures. Now, remember, we talked about different areas in technical analysis, and one of the areas that I talked to you about was the Dow Theory. The Dow Theory, very quickly I mentioned, was created by Charles Dow, and that is what is the basis of Dow Jones Industrial Averages. And what was all this Dow Theory about? In the early 1900s, Dow used to say in different articles that there are different principles on which the stock markets move. Most paramount among them was biggest move in any direction, which was called the tide. The tide was the biggest move in the market, and the tide was mentioned as a big major bull or bear move in a market or an individual trend. Now, in the Dow Theory, we also understood that there were changes always taking place in the Dow Jones Industrial Averages, and when changes took place in the Dow Jones Industrial Average, there had to be a supporting change in the DJTA, which was the Dow Jones Transport Averages. We're talking about industrial averages and transport averages. What are all these about? These are indices based on industry averages or companies related with transport. So we had mega trends or big tides, the primary trends. Along with them, we also had secondary trends or waves, which meant smaller moves happening in a big trend. Now, these can occur between a major trend, and then we had the day-to-day small ripple effects or small fluctuations. So we had a primary trend, the tide, and then we had waves, which were secondary trends, and then we had little ripples within these bigger waves and bigger tides. So, tides, waves, and ripples all had the impact on the stock market movements. But Dow said, the Dow Theory says, the Dow principle admits that these small intraday ripple effects or small changes do not matter in the bigger scheme of affairs. Now, these bigger scheme of affairs will not consider these small intraday changes. These small intraday changes may be good for intraday traders or jobbers. Remember what a jobber is or what an intraday trader is. They are market participants who take part into the stock market activities and do trading on a day-to-day basis. They do not switch over positions to the next day. They may, but these short-term investors with short-term gains. But remember, I keep telling you, I keep telling all my students, stock market is for the long term. Long-term investments are going to give you long-term benefits. While I'm talking to you about long-term investments, we need to understand Dow's attitudes about bigger moves. So long-term investments and bigger moves make sense. Now, this was about Dow Theory. Another important thing that we need to talk about is the Elliott wave theory. The Elliott wave theory created by R.N. Elliott. He had the idea in the mid-19th century, or 1939 to be exact, in a number of articles in the in newspapers what this theory was all about. Elliott considered that the market moved in a rhythm. The market moved with rhythmic regularity. There was a system towards the market moving in any direction. And these rhythmic patterns could be used to predict future prices. These principles were based on 8 figures. 8 number figures would mean a number of series in 8 digits, which would mean 5 for one side of the train and 3 for the other side of a train. The Elliott wave theory also worked on the same principles like Dow in a way that you had bigger trends, intermediate trends, and small trends, all happening at the same time. Now, they moved in sequences of waves 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and the next leg would have been an ABC. Now, have a look at the graph, and you'll now exactly see the chart pattern of the Elliott wave principle. And you'll notice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then a correction at ABC. So you have a wave pattern going up and a correction pattern coming down. That is the Elliott wave principle. And the principle once again says that they have a logical rhythmic movement in the share prices in which you can predict future changes. I mentioned about the Fibonacci numbers. Fibonacci numbers is also being looked upon when Elliott works on the principle of Fibonacci. And these mathematical numbers help them in working out the principles of the Elliott wave theory. The question is, what does the Elliott wave actually do? Elliott wave is able to predict based on previous data. It is able to predict a rhythmic pattern in the future, wherever the future is going to. Now, these patterns will have smaller waves and still smaller waves within a bigger pattern, like one wave carrying over another wave and another wave carrying over a bigger wave. And like I mentioned, this principle works in tandem with the Fibonacci numbers. Now, once again, Fibonacci numbers is a mathematical representation, and we'll get back to it. The question is, does the Elliott wave theory work for investors? Now remember, we're talking about these waves for the long term. So maybe a day-to-day trader might not find Elliott wave to be a very exciting way of investing, but long-term investors will be able to take advantage of the Elliott wave theory. Now, there have been a number of correct predictions in the 20th century, in the 80s, in the 90s, but sometimes you are not able to actually determine the exact point of reversals in a capital market, because the only thing that is not constant is change. And capital markets do not keep static in one place. Elliott waves help determining bigger waves. And when we're working on the Fibonacci numbers, we're able to determine the exact mathematical percentages of the gain. Future trends are helped by the Elliott wave theory. But this is one principle. We've already talked about the Dow theory, but the Elliott theory needs to be understood. Does it work or not? Yes, it does. Times. But remember, technical analysis is all about predicting the future based on the price movement. And prices keep changing very quickly. So you have to be abreast of all that's happening in the market when you're applying all these principles, whether it's the Dow theory or the Elliott wave theory. Now, I did mention that the Elliott theory has taken popularity in the recent times. But since our market is not as old as it should be, sometimes Elliott theories might not be applicable here. Remember, one of the reasons these theories are not worked on is that a lot of hard work is required to apply these theories and principles into practice. So let us now talk about another theory or procedure or principle, and that is the great mathematician Fibonacci. Leonardo Fibonacci was able to determine a pattern about how number sequences work. Very interestingly, he was doing this while he was trying to find out about reproduction in rabbits. Now, what a rabbit reproduction has got to do with capital market movements is going to be very interesting, but that's what the gentleman did. He was trying to work out how rapid reproduction was working in what series, and then he applied that in the capital market. Don't forget, I did mention there were a lot of animals in the stock market, and I mentioned about bulls and bears, so here we have rabbits as well. Now, I'm not excited about rabbit reproduction, but I am excited about capital market increases and capital market profitabilities. So, Fibonacci numbers work in predicting future price trends. There are a series of numbers exceeding previous numbers. Put in another way, and have a look at the slide in front of you. The Fibonacci numbers are numbers that shall be looked at as simple numbers beginning with 1 and 1, and these are the only similar numbers, and then you add up the previous number to another number, which would mean a sequence of 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and the sequence goes on. You keep adding the previous numbers. That is how the Fibonacci numbers work. As the number gets larger, the ratio of adjacent numbers will become into a ratio which will measure 1.618. 1 ratio 1.618 is going to be perfect rectangular parameter that is found to be appreciated by architects in ancient books that we read. They found a rectangle with a 1 ratio 1.618 is going to give you the best fit in any architecture. And these numbers will be able to determine the direction of the market. Now, whenever you try to divide the bigger number by the smaller number, you'll have 0.618 as the biggest mean. This is Fibonacci numbers. Now, these are theories that work, and there are other theories as well with the Fibonacci numbers. Elliott takes advantage of the Fibonacci numbers. Now, we've had a lot of discussions, and there is a big list of other supporting theories that we have to look at. One of them is the Gann angle, another is the Kondratiev cycle, another is the chaos theory, and we have the neural networks as well. Now, these theories are all new theories, and what are these all about? Let's take a look at the Kondratiev cycle. Kondratiev cycle is given the name to a mathematician in Russia called Kondratiev, and he was a sensation in his times, and he discovered that there were very big business cycles as long as 50 years. And in the Stalin years, he got into disagreements with all the men who mattered and was in a great deal of difficulty. But he did predict all the big crashes even in the United States of America. Being a Russian, he studied the patterns and predicted rightly about the crashes of the 19th century and the 20th century. The Great Depression of the 1920s, and then the big crash of 1987 as well. Kondratev worked on large, long theories of 50-year period business cycle. Now we have another theory called the chaos theory. Chaos theory works on the principle that you have to find out patterns in randomness, and sudden changes in those randomnesses are sounded to be good for the stock market movement. Examples of fish in the ocean. They gave examples of fish in the seas, how suddenly they moved, schools of fish going in one direction and suddenly changing direction. And that was random. And then the entire school of fish moved in the other direction. Now apply it to the stock market, which would mean the big leaders would be able to apply them, and maybe a direction is found in randomness on the basis of a result of a company, and the rest of the market will follow that. That is what chaos theory is, in which a market leader or bigger player in the market is able to lead the rest of the market. So chaos theories are finding patterns in randomness. Out of nowhere, you develop patterns. Then we have neural networks. These are algorithms based on computer data in which you try to feed in data for results to be found out by the computers on what the stock market is going to be about. Neural networks is purely a computer-generated ideas about how the markets will behave based on the data that's fed into computers. So we talked about the Dow theory, we talked about the Elliott wave principle, we talked about Fibonacci numbers, we talked about Kondratev wave theory, we talked about the chaos theory, and we talked about neural networks as well. These are different theories that keep working in the capital markets. Now the question is, do these things work? But there's no doubt about this, and others as well. Yes, people have a great interest in such sort of analysis in which they're able to make money, and they've been able to apply these consistently at one time or the other to earn good money. There are a lot of fundamental analysts, I must admit, who do take advantage of technical analysis, but may not admit it. So this is the closet definition of analyst. Have a look at this diagram. These squares will tell you about fundamentals and technicals, where fundamentals will be working on balance sheets, the technicals will be working on the technical indicators and witchcraft. And in between, you'll have a closet diagram which will show people using fundamental analysis and technical analysis without admitting them. So these are technically called closet analysts, who say they are fundamental analysts, but they also take advantage of technicals but do not admit it. So this is interestingly called the closet analyst. Now, you might wonder, I just took a name of witchcraft. What is witchcraft analysis? This is part of technical analysis, and witchcraft would mean certain denominations about good luck and bad luck. And these have got to do a lot with investor behavior. One theory is, and this is applicable to the American markets, that all years ending at the year 5 as a digit will be a good year for the market. So maybe year 1995 or 2000 or 2005 or 2010, these will all be good years or have been good years for the stock market. Then there could be called the Super Bowl theory or the World Cup theory. In years when these Super Bowls or World Cups, that particular time or that particular month, there is little interest in the market as well. People are more focused on these other activities. Sometimes these ideas are generated and people are willing to accept this. Yes, it does work because it worked in the past. This is the philosophy of witchcraft analysis, in which people think that it will work. Or maybe it's Friday the 13th, not a good idea to invest in the market, but that's not true. These are ideas that are being generated by people. These are ideas that work for some, but may not work for others consistently. We have to look at all these theories and how these principles work for people. We talked about looking at all the charts that we've been doing in the past. And we looked at chart patterns like supports and resistances. We talked about shares being able not to go by previous highs, and that was called the resistance in a stock. And then we talked about shares not falling below or going to new lows, and we talked about support lines. And then we talked about trend lines, in which lines were drawn between two axes, minimally two, preferably three, in which trend lines were drawn to give supports and to give resistances wherever the draw trend lines used to create an impression of a bearish market or a bullish market. These trend lines helped us determine the limits of a market, where the market might not be able to fall down, where the market might get up. These trend lines help support and resistance lines. These we talked about previously, that these price changes are able to let us help determine the future direction of stock. We also discussed different patterns like double tops and double bottoms, head and shoulders, inverse head and shoulders. We also talked about moving averages. We talked about moving averages, working out how to find out prices moving ahead of the moving average being bullish. We also talked about oscillators, names like stochastic oscillators, which had parameters within 100 range, with 80 being the top and 20 being the bottom. We also talked about relative strength index, which once again had a 0 to 100 parameter, with a 70 telling us it's an overbought position and a reading below 30 telling us it's an oversold position. We also talked about different types of charts, with the simplest one being the line chart, which gave you a very simple graphic representation of end of the day data on which to see what the history is being made about stock markets moving up or down. We also talked about bar charts, giving you the open, high, low and close of the market in general or a share in particular. So you could find out what the bottom of the day was and the top of the day was, and whether the market closed below the opening or whether the market closed above the opening, to tell you whether a bullish formation is being made or whether a bearish trend is being seen. Then we also talked about the point and figure chart. Some people say the Dow was also behind the creation of point and figure charts. I also mentioned that there was no mention about dates in point and figure charts. In all these X's and O's that you have seen in the previous lectures marked upward trends and downward trends. you had X's indicating significant upward trends and O's marking significant downward trends. But did I mention it in the previous lectures that you would only have one particular alphabet in one line. In one particular vertical line, you would have X's and you would have O's, but you would never have X's and O's in the same vertical line. Because X's is going upwards and O's is going downwards, you can't mix them in one vertical line. So for all the X's and O's coming up, you'll have different segments being added to the right. So we talked about points and figures, and we talked about bar charts, and we talked about line charts. What we talked about? We talked about candlestick charting. And did I mention it to you that this is 500-year-old charting methodology, also used in China, also used in Japan and the rice market. It's a 500-year-old, but this has recently been coming up into the market. And I'm sure this is going to catch up very soon as being one of the better techniques of understanding, because this is perhaps the only pattern-making chart formations in which each bar will be able to give you a story about itself. Point in a line chart will not tell you anything. X's and O's in point and figure charts will tell you marks going up and down. Bar chart will only tell you what the open, high, low and close is, but the candlestick chart will tell you a different story each day by just looking at the formation of the candle. Candlestick charting is going to be important, significant, interesting development becoming more popular these days. I talked about relative strength index, but did I talk about relative strength ratio? A relative strength index is any index in relation to the market or any share's relative strength with the market. Or you could have an internal strength index as well for the particular share, but if you're comparing it with the market, it'll be called a relative strength index, and we'll talk about it in an aspect of ratios. So, a ratio of price to index tells you about the past data, how the stock behaves. A relative strength tells you any share's price in relation to another share or another share in an industry or the index as a whole. Obviously, you compare. I talked to you about EIC. And I hope you remember what EIC was. It wasn't far ago I talked to you about. It is the economic industry company analysis in which you compare the company with the industry and you find out what the norms of the industry are, and then you find out what the company is actually standing as an above average company in the industry or as a below average company in the industry. So, rising ratios indicate relative strength, falling ratios indicate relative weakness. Once again, rising ratios show the strength, falling ratios show the weakness. And then you are able to identify numbers hitting new highs and numbers hitting new lows. And of course, we do not want to forget that high trading volumes in an up market tells you that the market is bullish. And remember, high trading volumes in a bearish market also confirms the bearishness of a market. So we talked about volumes as well. Volume is another indicator that we take help from while talking about capital market directions. This was about relative strength. Strength in relation to something else, preferably a market. Did I tell you about the breadth indicator? Now, as you're going around with the technical analysis subject, you look at different words that keep coming up. different theories that are coming, different principles that we are talking about, and right now I'm talking about the breadth indicator. The breadth indicator tells you about the status of the breadth or the depth of the strength of the market. In the breadth indicator, one of the best things that we can look at is the advance to decline line. It is easier said to be the advanced decline line. Let me just explain to you another thing. Obviously, let's assume there are 500 companies or 1,000 companies. Obviously, some are going to be good companies, some are going to be average companies, some are going to be below average companies, some are going to be more liquid than the others, some are going to be illiquid companies, some are going to be strong companies, some are going to be weak companies. So obviously, all companies will be moving in certain directions. Even if they are moving in one direction, not all of them will be able to move with the same strength. Some market movers will be very strongly inclined to move in the direction with strength, while others will tend to follow the market leaders with lesser strength. And yet there will be companies that are moving in the opposite direction. ये एक चीज बड़ी इंटरेस्टिंग लगती है. मार्केट अगर ऊपर जा रही है तो कुछ कंपनियां नीचे क्यों जा रही हैं? तमाम की तमाम कंपनियां एक ही डायरेक्शन में क्यों नहीं जा रही? बट अगर मैं इसका आपको एग्जांपल दूं एक रोड का, तो अगर तमाम की तमाम गाड़ियां एक ही डायरेक्शन में जाएंगी तो वो सड़क कहीं तो खत्म होगी, उसके बाद कहाँ जाएंगी? कुछ गाड़ियां एक सिम्प में जा रही हैं और दूसरी गाड़ियां दूसरी सिम्प में जा रही हैं, बट बिकॉज दैट्स नेचुरल. तो शेयर्स भी कुछ ऊपर जा रहे हैं और कुछ नीचे आ रहे हैं. जाहिर है ये सारी उनकी कैपेबिलिटीज, कैपेसिटीज, फंडामेंटल स्ट्रेंथ के ऊपर है. ऑल गुड कंपनीज विल बी मूविंग अपवर्ड्स एंड ऑल गुड companies will be in a position to keep that direction intact, even if the market as a whole is bearish. So we'll have bullish shares in a bearish market, and we have bearish shares in a bullish market. Now all this bearish and bullishness might seem foolishness, but that's what the stock market is all about. Stock market has got the ability to make a fool of a fairly reasonable person if he's not been able to read the stock market right. So we don't want to become fools. We want to be somebody who rules. So we need to get in touch with the things that are happening in the stock market and try to understand the stock market so we're able to be able to rule the market or not let the market make a fool of us. So once again, markets will be bullish while you'll find shares that are bearish. And if markets are bearish, you'll find shares that are bullish. Now, the important thing for us is whether we're going to be investing in the market or whether we're going to invest in the shares. So the advanced decline line tells us something. On each given day, I mentioned कि अगर 500 शेयर हैं या 1000 शेयर्स हैं पूरी मार्केट में, तो उसमें से कुछ शेयर्स ऊपर जा रहे होंगे और कुछ शेयर्स नीचे और कुछ कहीं भी नहीं जा रहे होते, क्योंकि उसमें काम ही नहीं हो रहा होता. क्योंकि यह ज़रूरी नहीं है कि अगर 500 कंपनी है तो 500 कंपनियों में काम हो. कुछ कंपनियों में काम होता है, कुछ में नहीं होता और कुछ में बिल्कुल भी नहीं होता. It all depends. It all depends on the mood of the market. अब मार्केट का मूड को समझना और मार्केट कैसे चल रही है, इसमें एडवांस डिक्लाइन लाइन कैसे हमें हेल्प करती है. Now, advanced decline line is very simply put, the difference being charted بٹوین اپ شیئرز اینڈ ڈاؤن شیئرز. تو کیا ہوتا ہے اس میں کہ جتنے بھی ہم دیکھ لیتے ہیں کہ شیئرز آج لیٹ سے 500 شیئر ہیں, اس میں سے 350 شیئرز اپ گئے, 50 شیئرز ڈاؤن تھے اور 100 نیوٹرل تھے, اس میں ایکٹیویٹی. سو ویل بی ایبل ٹو پلاٹ چارٹ جس میں ایڈوانسز آر گوئنگ ٹو بی مور دین دی ڈکلائنس. میں کامن سینس کیا کہتی ہے کہ ظاہر ہے اگر اپ شیئر زیادہ ہیں ڈاؤن شیئر زیادہ ہیں تو مارکیٹ بلش ہے. اور اگر آپ کو یہ بات نہیں سمجھ آ رہی تو یہ I don't want to use the word foolish once again. آپ کو یہ سمجھ آنی چاہیے کہ شیئرز اگر اوپر ہیں زیادہ نمبر میں تو مارکیٹ بلش ہے, پلس ہے, پازیٹیو ہے, اپورڈس ہے, تیزی میں ہے. یہ ایک بڑا سمپل سا انڈیکیٹر ہے. کسی دن کے بھی شیئرز کو آپ دیکھ لیجئے تو آپ کو پتہ چل جائے گا کہ مارکیٹ آج پازیٹیو ہے یا نیگیٹو. اب اس میں ایک ویریشن میں آپ کو بتا سکتا ہوں کہ بعض دفعہ بہت کم شیئرز اوپر جاتے ہیں اور زیادہ نیچے, اور مارکیٹ پھر بھی آپ. یہ کیسے ہو سکتا ہے کہ 500 میں سے صرف 50 کمپنیاں اوپر گئیں, 300 کمپنیاں نیچے, مارکیٹ پھر بھی میں کہہ رہا ہوں بولش ہے. But that is a fact. Because انڈیکس ہوتا ہے, اس میں اسٹرینتھ ہوتی ہے بڑے شیئرز کی, بڑی کمپنیز. چند بڑی کمپنیز میں ابلٹی ہوتی ہے ٹو ڈائریکٹ دا مارکیٹ. یو ہیو پیک لیڈرز اینڈ یو ہیو فالوورز. لیڈر ایک ہی ہوتا ہے, چند ہوتے ہیں, باقی پیچھے جسے کہتے ہیں بھیڑ چال, پیچھے لگ جاتے ہیں بغیر سوچے سمجھے. وہ مارکیٹ میں کبھی بڑی انٹرسٹنگ سچویشن ڈیولپ ہو جاتی ہے کہ جو بڑی کمپنیز ہیں, جو اسٹرانگ کمپنی, وہ تو کسی میرٹ پہ اوپر جا رہی ہیں. باقیوں کو کیا پرابلم ہے؟ باقیوں کو پرابلم یہ ہوتی ہے کہ ان کی ایک ہرڈ بیہیویئر ہوتا ہے انویسٹر کا کہ چونکہ یہ اوپر جا رہی ہے تو باقی بھی اوپر ہی جائیں گے شیئر. یہ جنرل کنسیپٹ ہے ہمارے انویسٹر کا. یہ بیہیویئرل فائنانس میں اس کی زیادہ اسٹڈی. بٹ دیٹ از ناٹ ٹرو. Markets don't work like this. Markets work on internal strength and the relative strength to the market. And then we can have a look at the advanced decline line to understand this. So advanced decline lines میں ہمیں یہ پتہ چل جاتی ہیں. اگر advanced decline line بڑھ رہی ہے اور ساتھ prices بھی بڑھ رہی ہیں, ہمیں یہ بھی پتہ چل جاتا ہے کہ strength کتنی ہے. اگر اس کی بات کریں تو strength کا تعلق sentiment سے بھی ہے. تو سینٹیمنٹ انڈیکیٹرز کا بھی تعلق ہے اسٹرینتھ سے. اسٹرینتھ اینڈ سینٹیمنٹ. ناؤ سینٹیمنٹ کیا ہے؟ بلش سینٹیمنٹ ہے یا بیرش سینٹیمنٹ ہے, کنفیوژن ہے, یہ کہاں سے پتہ چلے گا؟ اس کے لیے ہم استعمال کرتے ہیں ایک شارٹ انٹرسٹ سینٹیمنٹ انڈیکیٹر. اس کا مطلب یہ ہوتا ہے کہ ہم کوئی چیز بیچتے ہیں جو ہمارے پاس نہیں ہوتی. وی آر سیلنگ سم تھنگ دیٹ وی ڈو ناٹ اون. نارملی اسٹاک مارکیٹ میں ہم پہلے چیز خریدتے ہیں پھر بیچتے ہیں, لیکن بعض اوقات ہم پہلے چیز بیچ دیتے ہیں, ہمارے پاس ہوتی ہی نہیں ہے. یہ بھی ایک طریقہ کاروبار کرنے کا یہاں پہ, کہ چیز بیچ دو چاہے آپ کے پاس ہے یا نہیں ہے. اسٹاک مارکیٹ میں بعض دفعہ ایسے ہے کہ یو ڈونٹ اون سم تھنگ بٹ یو سیل اٹ. دیٹ از کالڈ سیلنگ سم تھنگ دیٹ یو ڈو ناٹ اون از کالڈ شارٹ. جتنے زیادہ شارٹ اوپن انٹرسٹ آپ کو نظر آئیں گے اتنی ہی زیادہ مارکیٹ میں تیزی آئے گی. سوال یہ پیدا ہوتا ہے یہ شارٹ ہے کیا؟ شارٹ کا مطلب یہ ہے کہ آپ کو لگ رہا ہے کہ مارکیٹ میں مندی ہے, مارکیٹ میں ویکنیس ہے, لہذا آپ سیل کرتے ہو ود دا آئیڈیا کہ جب مارکیٹ نیچے آئے گی تو میں کور کر دوں. لیکن جنرلی اسپیکنگ جتنی زیادہ آپ, دین اگین اٹس ہرڈ بیہیویئر, جب آپ شارٹ کرتے جاتے ہیں تو مارکیٹ میں شاید اتنی گنجائش نہیں ہوتی اس کو ایکسیپٹ کرنے کی. اینڈ دین نیچرل ٹرینڈ کیا ہوگا؟ ایک اسپرنگ کوئل افیکٹ ہوگا کہ آپ مارکیٹ کو دبانے کی کوشش کر رہے ہو اور وہ واپس باؤنس بیک کرتے ہیں. دس از another indicator of a bullish sentiment. کیونکہ اسٹاک مارکیٹ کی ایک اپنی سائیکالوجی ہوتی ہے اور اسٹاکس کی سائیکالوجی ضروری نہیں ہے آپ کی سائیکالوجی سے میچ کرے. تو جیسے آپ سوچ رہے ہیں ویسے اسٹاک مارکیٹ ہو سکتا ہے نہیں سوچ رہی, بیکاز یہ ممکن نہیں ہے کہ آپ ایز این انڈیویجول ایک پوری اسٹاک مارکیٹ کو کنٹرول کر لیں. یس, یہ ضرور ممکن ہے کہ اسٹاک مارکیٹ آپ کو کنٹرول کرے اور ایسا کنٹرول کرے پھر آپ کو سمجھ نہ آئے کہ آپ کے ساتھ ہونا کیا ہے. یہ میں ان کے لیے کہہ رہا ہوں جو ڈے ٹریڈنگ میں بہت زیادہ ایکسائٹمنٹ میں حصہ لیتے ہیں. میں پھر آپ کو کہہ رہا ہوں اسٹاک مارکیٹ از فار لانگ ٹرم انویسٹمنٹ. سو when you short the market, there is a probability that the market will become bullish. Sentiment کی بات ہو رہی ہے. And vice versa, کہ آپ تیزی کے سینٹیمنٹ میں ہیں, مارکیٹ میں اسٹرینتھ نہیں ہے, تو obviously the more you buy, the probability is that the market will be bearish. Sentiments کی indicators میں نے ابھی بتائے ہیں, دیز آر شارٹ انٹرسٹ انڈیکیٹر جو بروکر حضرات بھی کیلکولیٹ کر لیتے ہیں کہ مارکیٹ میں سیلنگ زیادہ ہو گئی. جب سیلنگ زیادہ ہو جائے گی تو نیچرل ٹینڈنسی ہے کہ مارکیٹ اپورڈ باؤنس بیک کرے گی, اور آن دی ادر سائڈ اف بائنگ زیادہ ہے تو وہ ریشو آپ کو پتہ چل جائے گا کہ بائنگ ریشو زیادہ ہے تو مارکیٹ کین ہیو اے کریکشن. یہ تو بات تھی سینٹیمنٹ انڈیکیٹر کی یا شارٹ انٹرسٹ کوریج. اور میں نے ابھی ذکر کیا آپ کو بروکرز کا. تو بروکرز کی بھی ایک اسٹڈی, اگر بروکر اسٹاکس کو اسٹڈی کرتے ہیں تاکہ انویسٹرز کو بتایا جائے کس شیئر کو خریدا جائے اور کس کو بیچا جائے, تو پھر انویسٹرز بروکر کو بھی اسٹڈی کر لیتے ہیں کہ یہ کون سی زبان بول رہے ہیں. اب وہ کیسے ہے؟ اس میں نارملی ہم دیکھتے ہیں کہ اگر 10 کمپنیاں ایڈوائزری کمپنیز ہیں, بروکریج فرمز ہیں, ریسرچ ہاؤسز ہیں, وہ ایک ہی گانا گا رہے ہیں, سنگنگ دی سیم سانگ دیٹ دی مارکیٹ از بلش, تو آپ کو ایک اندازہ ہو جائے گا کہ 10 میں سے اگر 6 لوگ بلش کہہ رہے ہیں, 3 لوگ کچھ نہیں کہہ رہے اور ایک کہہ رہا ہے کہ بیرش ہے, تو جنرلی کیونکہ وہ مارکیٹ کو لے کے چلتے ہیں, کیونکہ وہ مارکیٹ کو ایڈوائز کرتے ہیں, کیونکہ انویسٹرز فالو کرتے ہیں انہیں, اٹ کین بی assumed that the market will be bullish. So investment advisory services informations can also talk about. اس میں ایک contrarian law ہے کہ اگر سب لوگ تیزی بول رہے ہیں تو پھر مندی ہو جائے گی, اور اگر سب لوگ مندی بول رہے ہیں یہ تیزی ہو جائے گی. یہ سارے سینٹیمنٹس کی بات ہو رہی ہے, یہ contrarian law کی بھی بات ہو رہی ہے. To think otherwise than the market, besides being in the market, you try to behave contrary to the market. Sometimes having a look at what the investment advisors are saying also tells you where the market is going. That is another talk about sentiment indication related to the investment advisory firms. Generally speaking, when 60% of investment advisors are telling you to be positive, the market will probably remain bullish. کیونکہ انویسٹمنٹ ایڈوائزرز اور ریسرچ فرمز کی ایک فالوئنگ ہوتی ہے, and we tend to follow the trend being given to us by the investment advisory firms. Now, another thing that we must look at is mutual funds. ابھی میں میوچل فنڈس کی ڈسکرپشنز کے بارے میں بات نہیں کروں گا, میں میوچل فنڈس کی لیکویڈیٹی کی بات کروں گا. میوچل فنڈس آر آلسو پارٹیسپینٹس آف دی اسٹاک مارکیٹ لائک انڈیویجول انویسٹرز. جب ہم ڈائریکٹ انویسٹمنٹس کی بات کرتے ہیں تو ہم وہ بات کرتے ہیں کہ ہم خود انویسٹمنٹس کر رہے ہیں اسٹاک مارکیٹ میں, تو یہ ڈائریکٹ انویسٹمنٹس ہیں. لیکن ہم اگر انویسٹمنٹ میوچل فنڈ کے ذریعے کر رہے ہیں تو وہ انڈائریکٹ انویسٹمنٹ. تو میوچل فنڈ لیکوڈیٹی ایک بڑا امپورٹنٹ indicator ہے about stock market direction. تو اگر میوچل فنڈس کی پوزیشن in buying the shares is not full, meaning they're liquid with cash, rich with cash, fluid with cash. اس کا مطلب ہے وہ انتظار کر رہے ہیں مارکیٹ میں بائی کرنے کا so that they can look at the best low prices to get into the market. اور اگر تمام میوچل فنڈس فلی انویسٹڈ ہیں تو فلی انویسٹڈ کا مطلب یہ ہے کہ اور پیسہ نہیں ہے تو پھر اس مارکیٹ کو اور فیول دینے کے لیے شارٹیج آف منی کی وجہ سے ہو سکتا ہے کہ ڈائریکشن ان دا مارکیٹ وڈ بی اسٹیبل اور تھنکنگ آف کمنگ ڈاؤن. سو میوچل فنڈ liquidity is also based on contrary opinion. We can also think that low liquidity implies bullishness in the market and high liquidity implies funds are committed and could be bearish. So high fund liquidity available would mean chance to buy. لیکن اگر فل کمٹمنٹس ہو گئی ہیں پھر تو فنڈس نے کمٹ کر لیا ہوا ہے اور مارکیٹ میں اسٹرینتھ شاید اتنی نہ رہے. تو میوچل فنڈس کو بھی دیکھ کے ہمیں اندازہ ہو جاتا ہے کہ مارکیٹ جا کہاں رہی ہے. موونگ ایوریجز کا میں نے آپ کو بتا دیا تھا کہ موونگ ایوریج سے ہم کیا اندازہ لگاتے ہیں. ان چیزوں کو جب ہم سمجھتے ہیں تو ہمیں انڈیکیٹرز کا پتہ چلنا شروع ہو جاتا ہے. اب مارکیٹس کا بڑھنا اور مارکیٹس کا گھٹنا سینٹیمنٹس کے حوالے سے سمجھنا بہت امپورٹنٹ ہے. بیکاز وداؤٹ اے سینٹیمنٹ the market will not be able to make a direction. You have to have a sort of a behavioral activity جس میں in tandem آپ سب ڈیسائیڈ کرتے ہیں کہ کس طرح آپ ڈیسائیڈ کریں کہ مارکیٹ کو تیز کرنا ہے یا اس کو ہم نے سوچنا ہے کہ مارکیٹ اسٹیبل رہے یا گرے. تو یہ امید ہے کہ یہ میں آپ کو یہاں ضرور بتا دوں یہ ٹیکنیکل انالیسس جو چند لیکچرز تھے یہ بڑے ایکسٹینسو لیکچرز تھے اور میں اب کنونسڈ ہوں گا کہ آپ اس کو سمجھنے میں اتنی زیادہ آپ کو مشکل نہیں پڑے گی بیکاز دیز ہیو بین ویری ڈیٹیلڈ ٹاکس اباؤٹ ٹیکنیکل انالیسس which we normally don't do. But here in the university we're definitely looking at the serious aspect of understanding technical analysis along with fundamental analysis. So we'll conclude our lecture on technical analysis and then we'll talk about other activities in the investment analysis. Thank you very much.